Have you seen Trigun? Not Trigun Stampede, but the original one. I watched it recently, and I really wanted to share with you guys my favorite scene from that anime. I heard a lot about Trigun Stampede when it came out, and initially I wasn't going to watch it at all because of the art style, the animation, the CGI. But I did get interested in the original Trigun, so I went back and I watched that. And I enjoyed it quite a bit, enough that I think I do want to go watch Trigun Stampede sometime this year, hopefully. If I can find the time, of course. Life is always busy, I'm sure you understand. But I absolutely want to talk about my favorite scene from the original Trigun anime, which if you haven't watched, you absolutely got to watch it. I won't really be giving a ton of spoilers about the story and anime in general, if you're worried about that. Mostly just going to be talking about my favorite character, Nicholas D. Wolfwood. I didn't really know a lot about him going into the anime. I knew a few things, or at least thought I did, and that was enough to make me already think, oh, I'm going to like this character. I have the same name as him. He looks cool. He's supposedly, and we'll talk about this, he's supposedly a priest or pastor, some kind of traveling Christian spiritual leader. And he carries around this massive cross with him that I've seen in art and whatnot. So I was thinking, I am going to love this guy. And I really did end up loving his character, but not for the reasons I thought I would. But again, I'm going to be talking about him for this video, and not really. So there's going to be spoilers maybe for his character and his story, or there will be, not maybe, but not so much for anything else in the show, if you're worried about that. But go watch it. I think it's good. It's not too long. Would recommend. Again, so going into the show, I really thought that Nicholas D. Wolfwood, Will of D, by the way, question mark? I thought he was going to be this Christian in an anime, which, you know, that's right up my alley. I'm super interested in that. And I was a little hesitant, you know, as I always am, with Christians being depicted in popular media, but I was optimistic. Initially, I found him really cool. He has a really interesting personality. He's very outgoing and interesting. A very striking character that just kind of pulls you in. I can imagine being around him in person and just being overwhelmed by his charisma, I guess. Of course, right off the bat, the first few episodes that he's in, I'm questioning a little bit, or at least suspecting a little bit, his Christian background. Not trying to be too mean, not saying he's not a Christian, that I felt that way, but he was often smoking, he would swear a lot, and again, not saying like, oh, he's definitely not a Christian because of those things. I'm just saying, if he's supposed to be representing a priest, typically those aren't things a priest tends to do, so far that I have noticed anyway. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I can't deny he is a really cool guy. The fact that he has a massive gun that he carries around with him, that he wraps up to look like a giant cross that he carries on his back, that's just dope. That's just cool. I won't pretend like that's not awesome. I want something like that. I want to carry a massive weapon on my back that looks like a cross. I probably shouldn't, but watching that show really makes me want to. And he has a wonderful interaction with Vash in the anime. I know the original anime is fairly different than the manga, which is fairly different than the Trigun Stampede anime. So there's lots of differences. I'm going to be pulling from a little bit of the manga as well for his character, but mainly talking about the anime. He has this interesting dynamic with Vash. Vash presents himself as a pacifist, never wants to resort to violence, always a last resort. Whereas Nicholas, can I call him Nick? I don't know if I should, maybe I'll just stick with Nicholas. But Nicholas, he's much more quick to resort to violence. He's never presented as evil, but he does come into conflict with Vash a lot and becomes antagonistic sometimes because he's frustrated with Vash that Vash won't resort to violence when, to Nicholas, it seems like the most logical way to resolve an issue. And it really made me consider what the appropriate Christian response to that question would be. And I'm not going to get into that today, but I would like to. Maybe after I watch Trigun Stampede, I can get into more of that dynamic between pacifism and violence and where a faithful Christian should lie in that. But I really do like that watching the show made me think about that. And of course I've thought about that before, but there aren't a lot of shows out there that make you think, you know? There's a lot of shows out there you watch and you just turn your brain off and look at the funny colors. Trigun really presented a lot of philosophical queries to think about, and I appreciate that. But again, what's interesting is Nicholas, supposedly a priest, is presented as more of a violent individual than Vash, who is not, and never really hinted at even to be a Christian in any way. And there's probably loads that I could get into there, but again, I should touch on that in its own video. So I should probably start with Nicholas's backstory. It's never even really told to us until way near the end of the show, but we get to find out a lot of interesting things about Nicholas. Nicholas at first presents himself as a priest. His very first interaction with Vash, he lays it out. He's a traveling priest. Of course, he never specifies any sort of denomination or anything, but this takes place way far in the future, so they probably don't really have denominations on planet Gunsmoke. But I'd wager to say this is far more Catholic of a depiction than really any other kind of denomination, given that, yes, it's a fictional story, but it was written by a human being who lives on Earth right now. So, much like Poochie from JoJo's, it might not be overtly stated, but I think we can safely assume Catholicism is the main idea here. And I gotta be honest, I typically don't get fooled a lot by TV shows. I typically tend to see things coming and can guess things before they happen. As an author myself, it's just easy to pick apart a story as I'm watching or reading it. But Trigun actually got me. Maybe it was because I was just really hopeful that Nicholas was an authentic Christian and a priest. But I really wasn't expecting the surprise twist later that he's not. It's a lie. It's a cover-up, and he's actually not a Christian at all. We find out in his backstory that he grew up an orphan, and he grew up in a Christian orphanage, led by nuns and the whole gig. Again, typically a Catholic thing. But while he was a child there, for reasons I don't quite remember, unless it wasn't even stated, but the orphanage got into some kind of dealings with some nefarious individuals, I'll just say. And one of these individuals trained up young Nicholas to be some kind of assassin, basically. They've got their own name for it, but I would argue it's essentially an assassin. And part of the assassin lifestyle is to take on a costume so you can get close to people thinking that you're, a nice Christian priest when you're actually, going to kill them. And that's why his guns are wrapped up to look like a cross. That's why he dresses in, his dress is meant to, not a dress, but the clothing that he wears is meant to look more like the clothing of a priest. He does that not because he's actually a priest, but because he's actually trying to get close to Vash because he has been ordered to assassinate Vash. Or at least help in the assassination of Vash. I think it's somewhat unclear, at least in the original anime, but he's definitely undercover and working with the bad guys against Vash, and not authentically a Christian, unfortunately. And I really should have guessed that. Over the times of the show, as he's doing all these non-Christian things, and Vash even points it out sometimes. Nicholas will do something or say something, and Vash will be like, "That doesn't seem much like a priestly behavior to me." And I should have got it, but maybe I was just hoping too much. And it comes out in the end that he'd been faking it. It was a costume. It wasn't true. And that leads me to my favorite episode in that original anime. It comes time, it's down to the wire, and Nicholas is expected to turn on Vash, take the costume off and be the villain he's supposed to be. But because he's been spending so much time with Vash, he's grown as a person, he's become somewhat of friendly rivals with Vash, he can't turn on him now. He's changed as a person. He's a better person now. And instead, he turns on the other villains. He turns on the very person that trained him up to be an assassin. When it came down to that final moment, when he had to make an important choice, he sided with Vash. But the shootout didn't exactly go his way, and he sustained some fatal injuries. He won the fight, but he wasn't going to make it very long. And so I was so curious at this point, I really didn't know what he was going to do. So I was so surprised when he literally crawled, because he's bleeding a lot, like he's hours away from death with how much blood he's losing, and he can't even stand, so he crawls to a church. This whole shootout, this whole episode takes place in this abandoned town. So there's this empty church that he crawls into. He crawls right up through the center aisle, all the way up to the altar. And he's just covered in blood. There's blood everywhere. And he takes off that gun that looks like a cross, and he sets it up on the altar. And again, he can't stand, so the best he can do is get on his knees, is start kneeling, because he's too weak to stand. And this is my favorite scene in that entire anime, and it was entirely shocking to me. The light coming through the church windows is cast on him just perfectly, so that the shadow that you see looks like Nicholas is kneeling before a cross. In actuality, he's, holding the gun that he's used to kill people, and, he's falling over practically, but the shadow that's being cast looks like he's kneeling before a cross. And it blew my mind. I noticed it immediately, and it was so amazing. I was like, was that a mistake? Did they mean to do that? I mean, they had to have meant to do that, but it was incredible. I mean, it was way more deep than I was expecting that to get at any point. And he prays. Nicholas prays to God. And it's not the perfect prayer by any means. It's not a sinner's prayer and how a Christian might understand that. It's very real, and I appreciate that. It's definitely not like a lot of Christian media that maybe you've seen, where the person says all the right things somehow, and they just like they're an atheist, and then the critical moment comes and they just know suddenly all the correct theology in the Bible. You know what I mean? But that's not really in practice how it tends to go. Usually when we come to God, we don't know what's going on, and we figure it out later. At least that's how it was for me. And that's why I appreciate this so much, is it reminds me a lot of myself. My first tearful prayer to God was not, potentially the most biblically correct thing I've ever said or words that came out of my mouth, but it was authentic. I meant it. And later in life, after that, God worked with me to help me learn more about, correct theology. But in that initial moment, when I'm just becoming a Christian, I don't know what's going on. I just know that I need God and that I need Jesus. And that's the feeling that I got from Nicholas in that scene. It's a really powerful scene where he realizes that he has been wrong. And the way he's talking, it seems as though he doesn't think that there's any time left for him to make it right. He fantasizes about being born again and living a new life. Of course, he envisions it as more as reincarnation, but I think the symbolism, again, is really, really meant to be there. He fantasizes about reincarnated and getting a second chance as he's metaphorically kneeling before a cross, praying, literally, spiritually getting that second chance. As Christians, we know that even after we die, we get to live a long, long time with God. This time here on earth is just the beginning. But I appreciate how genuine his prayer is. He doesn't understand or know a lot. I'm sure he's drawing on a little bit of his childhood, being with the nuns in the orphanage. I'm sure he knows a little bit. And I'm sure he had to learn a little bit to at least accurately attempt to pretend to be a Catholic priest as he's going around. You can't fool anyone if you really don't know nothing. And after he prays this authentic, genuine prayer, he dies. Literally dies. And I thought for sure they would, carry him away and patch him up and he'd be fine the next day, like in One Piece, and where people can be blown apart and still be fine the next episode. But no, genuinely he died. And I really had to sit there for a few minutes after that episode and just to take that in. How surprised I was that that scene even happened. I was not expecting it. And I absolutely loved it. I love that scene. And that episode alone makes it worthwhile to watch the entirety of Trigun. I thought I would like Nicholas because I thought he would be like me how I am now. I ended up really liking Nicholas because he's more like me how I was back then. I thought I would see myself today in him, but I saw myself yesterday in him. And that made me love him maybe even more, because I used to be in that place too. My testimony is on this channel. If you haven't seen it, feel free to go watch it. I know a lot of people have. But in it, I share that I too used to lie to people. I used to pretend I was something that I wasn't. I even joined and became a leader of a Christian organization at the college I was going to before I was a Christian, while I was still an atheist. I was masquerading as a Christian leader. I was faking it. And I had that moment too, where I just had to have an authentic moment with God, realizing that I had been making wrong choices, that I had made mistakes, that my whole life up to that point was on the wrong track, and I needed God to fix it. Thankfully, unlike Nicholas, I'm still alive. I didn't have to die. I didn't have to get shot to piece it all together. I got to experience it in a much more leisurely fashion. But not everybody gets that time. I'm blessed that God was patient with me and gave me all that time to wrestle with those things. But some people are like Nicholas. They go through their whole life failing to make things right with God, and then they might only get a few minutes at the end. I don't want you to have to wait for that. I really want to stress how important it is to really start grappling with these things. I'm not saying you've got to head to church right now and give your life to Jesus. I would love that, but I want it to be authentic. It needs to be authentic. What I really want is I want everyone to at least be grappling with these things, thinking about life after death, thinking about God, thinking about the choices that we make in our lives, whether they're the right or wrong choices, because that really matters. Maybe you were led down the wrong path. Maybe, like Nicholas, some adult in your life taught you things that weren't true and made you do things that weren't right. Don't wait to turn things around in your life. Don't wait to get shot to turn things around. And don't feel like you need to have everything together when you come to God. Don't feel like you've already got to be fixed. God does the fixing. You just need to show up. There are so many people in my life that I think have the same mindset as Nicholas, the same mindset of Christianity is not for me. It's not even an argument of truth. It's not an argument of whether it's good or bad or right or wrong. They just don't think it's for them. Whether they think they're too sinful, too far, too messed up, that they could never be right, that they could never change. I genuinely know a lot of people like that, and it breaks my heart. They don't know how broken I used to be. They don't know how broken Nicholas Wolfwood used to be, or Moses, or Paul, or many of the people in the Bible who, a lot of them, far worse than you or me. Moses literally killed somebody. I doubt you've killed somebody. But even if you have, there is still room for you at the foot of the cross. Nicholas found that out at the end of his life. But I wouldn't say that was too late, because he still got there. Not everybody does. Make sure that you're somebody who does. At least make it there. You don't have to get all the way across the finish line in this life. You just got to make it to the starting point, and God will take you from there. I really want to stress, God loves you. Does not matter what you've done. It does not matter how far away you think you are. And I promise you you can change. If you genuinely desire that change, it is possible. There is so much I have in my life now I never thought I would. I'm growing every day, and I am way farther in life than I ever thought I would be, thanks to God. God can do amazing things. I promise you that. No matter how messed up things might be, I promise you God can fix it. But the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be. Jesus is for everyone. I believe that with my whole soul. And I want you to have the kind of faith that Nicholas D. Wolfwood had in Trigun, of a humble willingness to just go to the cross and admit you've made the mistakes, and wait to see what God does with you then. Because God's not going to punish you. He's not going to say, I told you so, and kick you out. He's going to welcome you with open arms. If you really do not think that Christianity is for you, I beg you to read the prodigal son parable. Or you can watch my favorite scene from my favorite episode of Trigun, because I wholeheartedly believe that Nicholas D. Wolfwood is in the anime heaven right now. Or I suppose he's still alive, because Trigun Stampede is now showing, so one version of him is still alive, but the other version is dead. This is getting complicated. I should probably end it here. Watch Trigun, read your Bibles, and grapple with the hard questions in life before you won't have time to. Thank you for watching.